My name is Lacey Wilson, and at 35 years old, I had constructed a technology empire that hardly anyone in my family knew existed. I was making my way back to my childhood residence for Christmas dinner, the first time in 7 years, with anxiety churning in my stomach. My father, Harold, had always shown preference for my brothers Vincent and Gregory, but nothing could have prepared me for what he would declare at dinner. When he announced that I would be excluded from the inheritance, I simply nodded and continued eating. No one had any idea what was about to unfold. If you are viewing this right now, please click the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from as I guide you through an evening that transformed my family forever. I was raised in Oakage, a small town in Ohio where everybody knew everybody else. Our family residence was a spacious colonial-style house on Maple Street, the type that makes neighbors presume you possess wealth. And we did, to some degree. My father, Harold, had established a thriving manufacturing business from nothing, something he never allowed anyone to forget. From my earliest recollections, it was obvious who held the most importance in our household. My brothers Vincent and Gregory were prepared to inherit the family enterprise from the time they could walk. Vincent, 3 years my senior, was the logical one with an aptitude for figures. Gregory, 2 years my junior, possessed the charm and interpersonal abilities. And me. I was the middle child who never quite aligned with my father's concept of success. Business is a man's domain, Lacey, my father would declare whenever I demonstrated interest in the company. You should concentrate on finding a suitable husband who can support you. This was during the early 2000s, not the 1950s. Yet my father remained stuck in time regarding gender expectations. My mother, Diane, would offer me compassionate glances, but never challenged him. She belonged to a generation of women who stood behind their spouses, not alongside them. School became my sanctuary. I thrived academically, especially in mathematics and computer science. While my brothers were attending football matches and business dinners with my father, I was remaining late in the computer laboratory with Mrs. Bennett, my high school instructor, who first exposed me to programming. You possess a talent, Lacey, Mrs. Bennett told me during my senior year. The world is evolving. Technology represents the future, and you could be part of creating it. When college application season came, I aimed for Stanford. Their computer science curriculum was among the finest in the nation, and Silicon Valley was where innovation occurred. I labored relentlessly on my application, and when the acceptance letter came, I was thrilled. My father was not. Stanford in California? That's absurd. The family enterprise is here, he dismissed when I presented him the letter. Furthermore, do you realize how costly that institution is? I did realize. I had investigated scholarships and financial assistance options, but there remained a substantial gap. When I sought a crucial scholarship and was denied, I approached my father for assistance. We were in his home study, a room dominated by dark wood and leather that carried the scent of cigars. Behind his massive desk, he appeared like a magistrate about to deliver judgment. Your brothers must focus on business degrees to inherit the company, he explained. That's where the family funds need to be invested. Your computer interest is merely a pastime. It's not a pastime, Dad. It's what I want to pursue with my life, I protested. Well, you'll need to discover how to finance it yourself, he responded, returning to his documents. The discussion was finished. So I did precisely that. I postponed my admission for a year and worked 3 positions simultaneously. Waitressing in the morning, retail in the afternoon, and bookkeeping for local enterprises at night. I saved every cent, secured loans, and finally reached Stanford the following autumn. Those college years were harsh. While other students enjoyed the complete college experience, I was continuously working side jobs to survive. I barely slept 4 hours nightly during examination week. But I graduated with distinction and, more significantly, with the abilities and connections to enter the technology industry. My initial position was at a small startup in San Francisco. The salary was humble, but the experience was priceless. I worked directly with the founders, learning everything possible about building a company from scratch. When that startup was purchased 2 years later, I had sufficient savings and knowledge to begin considering my own enterprise. Meanwhile, back in Oakage, Vincent and Gregory had joined the family business as executives. Every telephone conversation with my mother included updates about their accomplishments and my father's pride in them. I was genuinely happy for my brothers, but the contrast in how our career trajectories were appreciated was striking. The final breaking point occurred during a brief visit home 10 years ago. I had just launched my first company, a healthcare technology platform that utilized artificial intelligence to enhance patient care. We were pre-revenue, operating on venture capital, and I was working constantly to make it flourish. During a family dinner, similar to the one I was now driving toward, my father had inquired about my little computer project, in a condescending tone. "Actually, we just completed our Series A funding round," I said, attempting to explain the importance. "Series A? What does that even signify?" my father interrupted. "Genuine businesses create products and profits, not elaborate presentations for investors." Vincent chuckled. "Dad makes a valid point, Lacey. When will you obtain a real job?" "This is a real job," I argued. "The technology we're developing could transform healthcare." "Well, when you're finished playing entrepreneur in California and ready to return to reality, there might be a role in accounting at the family business," my father offered, as if doing me a tremendous favor. I departed the next morning without saying farewell. For the subsequent several years, my contact with the family was restricted to occasional telephone calls with my mother and Christmas cards. They knew I was still in California, still working in technology, but little more. I never shared my increasing success, and they never truly asked for specifics. Now, as I pulled up to the familiar house in my rented Toyota, I took a deep breath. My own vehicle, a custom Tesla, was securely parked in my garage in San Francisco. No need to arrive in an automobile that cost more than most residences in this neighborhood. I had intentionally understated everything about my appearance. Designer clothing exchanged for a simple sweater and jeans. The only luxury I couldn't bear to remove was my watch, a gift to myself when we reached our first 1,000,000 users. But even that could be concealed under my sleeve. This Christmas dinner was my attempt at reconciliation, at showing my family who I had become, despite their lack of support. Little did I know just how dramatic that revelation would prove to be. The house appeared exactly as it always did during the holidays. Multicolored lights outlined the roof and windows. A wreath hung on the front door, and through the windows, I could see the glow of the Christmas tree. For a moment, I felt like a teenager again, coming home from school to the aroma of my mother's cooking. I hesitated before pressing the doorbell. 7 years is a lengthy time to be essentially separated from your family. Would they notice the changes in me? Would I fit in any better now than I did then? My mother answered the door, her face brightening when she saw me. "Lacey, you made it." She pulled me into a tight embrace. The familiar scent of her perfume brought back a flood of memories. Come in, come in. Everyone is already here." Everyone indeed. As I stepped into the living room, a sea of familiar faces turned toward me. My brothers Vincent and Gregory were standing by the fireplace, beverages in hand. Vincent's wife, Sophia, was arranging gifts under the tree while their children Tyler and Emma, now 14 and 12, were absorbed in their phones. Gregory's wife Heather was in deep conversation with Aunt Martha, my father's sister, while their 16-year-old son Jackson sat in the corner, completely engrossed in his smartphone. Uncle Frank, Aunt Martha's husband, was watching a football game with Uncle James and Aunt Patricia, my mother's brother and his wife. And there, in his customary armchair like a monarch on his throne, sat my father. He looked older than I recalled, his hair now entirely gray, but his posture remained commanding, his gaze still piercing as he evaluated me. "Lacey," he said, nodding in acknowledgement. Not a hug, not even rising from his chair. Just my name spoken like a declaration of fact. "Hi, Dad," I replied, matching his tone. "Merry Christmas." Vincent approached first, giving me an awkward side hug. "Welcome home, sis. California treating you well?" "It is," I said simply. Still doing that app thing? Gregory joined in, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Something like that, I answered vaguely. Well, the family business is thriving, Vincent continued. We just expanded to 3 new states last quarter. Dad put me in charge of operations across the Midwest. And I'm handling all major client relationships now, Gregory added. Revenue is up 37% since last year. The pattern was so familiar, it was almost amusing. My brothers establishing their success, seeking approval, marking their territory. I simply smiled and offered congratulations. And what about you, Lacey? My father finally spoke up. Did that startup of yours ever get off the ground? Before I could answer, my mother intervened. Dinner is almost ready. Lacey, would you help me in the kitchen? I gratefully followed her, escaping the interrogation. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of roast turkey, stuffing, and freshly baked pies. My mother had always been an exceptional cook, and Christmas dinner was her masterpiece. I'm so glad you came, she said as she handed me a stack of plates to carry. Your father would never admit it, but he has missed you. I doubted that very much, but I nodded anyway. How have you been, Mom? Really? She paused, considering the question. Oh, busy with the usual. The boys bring the grandchildren over often. Vincent and Gregory are at the house almost daily for business meetings with your father. She lowered her voice. I wish you called more often. Guilt tugged at me. I know I should have. Are you happy out there in California? Do you have someone special? The concern in her voice was genuine, and I felt a pang of regret for keeping her at such a distance. I am happy, Mom. My work keeps me very busy, but I love what I do. No serious relationship right now, but that's okay. She squeezed my arm. As long as you're happy, that's what matters. If only my father shared that sentiment. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space reserved for holidays and special occasions. The table was arranged with the finest china, crystal glasses, and silverware that had been in the family for generations. I took my designated seat between Aunt Martha and Emma, directly opposite my father at the head of the table. The meal commenced with my father's customary Christmas prayer, expressing gratitude to God for family prosperity and another successful year of business. I noticed he made no reference to my homecoming. Conversation circulated around me, cautiously avoiding any potentially contentious subjects. Whether sports, the children's academic activities, community news, anything except politics or personal matters that might disturb the carefully preserved illusion of family unity. I concentrated on engaging with my niece and nephew. Emma was now in middle school and had cultivated an interest in science. Tyler was in high school playing basketball and considering colleges. Jackson, Gregory's son, barely lifted his eyes from his phone, even when addressed directly. What are you so fixated on over there? Gregory finally inquired of him. Research, Jackson mumbled, not expanding. Put it away during dinner, Heather, his mother, instructed. Jackson reluctantly obeyed, though I noticed him stealing glances at the device every few minutes. So, Lacey, Aunt Martha said beside me, Diane tells me you have your own enterprise now. What precisely do you do? All eyes focused on me, and I felt the familiar pressure to downplay my accomplishments to avoid overshadowing my brothers or disturbing my father. I established a healthcare technology company, I explained, keeping it straightforward. We create software that assists hospitals and physicians in providing better care for patients. That sounds intriguing, Aunt Martha responded authentically. Is it performing well? I could sense my father's stare intensifying. We are making headway, I said tactfully. Vincent chuckled. Tech startups consume investor funds for years before they ever generate a profit, if they do at all. Meanwhile, manufacturing remains the foundation of the American economy. The family business just had its most successful quarter ever, my father added with pride. Your brothers have truly elevated it to the next level. And there it was. the redirection to the family enterprise, to my brother's accomplishments, the unmistakable message about what type of success was appreciated in this household. I assisted my mother and Sophia in clearing the plates after the main course, grateful for the temporary reprieve from the table. In the kitchen, Sophia surprised me with a sincere question. "What is it actually like operating your own company?" she asked quietly. "Vincent never shares much about the business aspects of things." I hesitated, then decided to be candid. "It is the most challenging thing I have ever undertaken. Continuous pressure, impossible choices, sleepless nights. But when you are creating something you believe in, something that could genuinely help people, it is worthwhile." She nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds more satisfying than simply continuing something someone else established." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by my mother announcing it was time for dessert. As we returned to the dining room with pies and coffee, I observed my father tapping his glass with a spoon, the traditional signal that he had something significant to say. Little did I know this announcement would alter everything. The room fell quiet as my father stood at the head of the table, commanding attention as he always had. He was wearing his preferred navy blue sweater, the one he saved for special occasions, and his expression was grave. "Before we enjoy Diane's wonderful desserts, I have an important announcement to make," he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. "As you all know, Wilson Manufacturing has been expanding steadily over the past few years, thanks largely to the outstanding work of Vincent and Gregory." My brothers straightened in their chairs, basking in the recognition. Vincent's wife, Sophia, glowed proudly, while Gregory's wife, Heather, nodded in agreement. "We have recently purchased our largest competitor in the Midwest, expanding our operations considerably," my father continued. "This means we are now the largest manufacturer of industrial equipment in 5 states, with plans to expand further in the coming year." Murmurs of approval circulated around the table. Uncle Frank lifted his glass in a silent toast to my father, who acknowledged it with a nod before continuing. "With this expansion comes the need for clear succession planning. I am not getting any younger," he said with a small laugh that was echoed politely around the table. "So, after careful consideration and discussions with our family attorney, I have made some decisions about the future of the company and our family assets." I took a sip of water, already expecting what was coming. This was not the first time I had heard about succession planning, though it was the first time in years that I was present for such a discussion. "Vincent will assume the role of CEO when I retire next year," my father announced. "His financial expertise and operational knowledge make him the natural choice to lead the company forward." Vincent nodded solemnly, accepting this anticipated coronation with practiced modesty. "Gregory will serve as president, overseeing all client relationships and new business development, areas where he has already demonstrated himself exceptional." Gregory smiled and raised his glass to our father in gratitude. "Together, they will guide Wilson Manufacturing into the next generation, preserving and building upon the legacy I have created." The table burst into congratulations for my brothers. Aunt Martha patted Vincent's hand while Uncle James clapped Gregory on the back. My mother smiled proudly, though I noticed her glance in my direction with a hint of worry. My father cleared his throat, and the room quieted again. His gaze turned directly to me for the first time that evening. "As for the matter of inheritance," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I have decided to revise my will to reflect the contributions made to the family business." Here it comes, I thought, maintaining a neutral expression. "Vincent and Gregory will inherit equal shares of the company and the majority of our family assets," he stated firmly. Then, looking directly at me, he delivered the blow he had clearly been preparing. "Lacey, you will not be receiving an inheritance." Though I had anticipated this, hearing it stated so bluntly in front of the entire family sent a shock through me. The room went completely silent. I could feel everyone's eyes darting between my father and me, waiting for a reaction. "You have chosen your path away from this family and business," my father continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than apologetic. "Vincent and Gregory have devoted their lives to building what I started. They deserve the inheritance." I maintained my composure, meeting his gaze steadily. 7 years ago, this announcement might have devastated me, might have provoked tears or anger, but I was no longer that person seeking validation from a man who had never truly seen me. I understand, I said calmly, picking up my fork and taking a bite of apple pie. The flavors barely registered as I focused on maintaining my dignity. The tension around the table was palpable. My mother's face had gone pale, her hands gripping her napkin tightly. Gregory looked vaguely uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with me. Vincent, on the other hand, wore a barely concealed expression of satisfaction. Aunt Martha broke the silence first. "Harold, is that really necessary to announce at Christmas dinner?" Her disapproving tone suggested she found the timing, if not the decision itself, inappropriate. "Family business should be discussed with family present," my father replied firmly, sitting back down. "Now let us enjoy dessert." Conversations slowly resumed around the table, though notably more subdued than before. I focused on my pie, aware of the occasional glances of pity or curiosity directed my way. As I sat there, memories flooded back. The time I had asked for help with college tuition and was refused, the dismissal of my career choices, the constant comparisons to my brothers, the subtle and not so subtle messages that as a daughter, I was somehow less valuable, less worthy of investment. Yet beneath the familiar hurt was a strange sense of peace. I no longer needed my father's approval or financial support. I had built something on my own terms, something he could never take credit for or control. "Are you okay?" Emma whispered beside me, her 12-year-old face concerned. I smiled genuinely at my niece. "I am perfectly fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated relationships." She nodded with surprising understanding. Grandpa can be really old-fashioned. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. The conversation around the table had shifted to holiday plans and New Year's resolutions, the awkwardness of my father's announcement being carefully covered over with mundane topics. I participated minimally, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed. My mother's eyes kept finding mine across the table, silently communicating her distress. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. This was not her fault, and I did not want her to suffer for my father's decisions. I was contemplating the earliest polite time to make my exit when Jackson, who had returned to his phone as soon as my father's announcement concluded, suddenly gasped loudly. His reaction was so dramatic that all conversation ceased and every head turned toward him. Little did anyone know that his next words would completely transform the evening and the family dynamic forever. "Aunt Lacey is on the Forbes billionaire list," Jackson exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement as he stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, heavy with confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Gregory asked his son, frowning. "There must be another Lacey Wilson," Vincent said dismissively. "Forbes just released their annual billionaire list, and he is probably confusing you with someone else." Jackson shook his head vigorously. "No, it is definitely her. Look." He turned his phone around, showing the screen to those nearest to him. "It even has her picture and everything." My heart pounded as understanding dawned. The Forbes list had indeed been released that morning. My PR team had cautioned me I would be featured despite my requests for privacy. The acquisition of my company had been completed last month, and the terms were now public. "Let me see that," my father demanded, extending his hand for the phone. Jackson stood and brought the device to his grandfather. I watched as my father's expression transformed from skepticism to shock. His face paled noticeably as he stared at the screen. "This says you are worth $3.2 billion, he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked up at me. "That you founded Health Tech AI, which was just acquired by a tech giant." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived sooner than I had planned. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "That is correct." The room erupted in exclamations and questions, everyone speaking over each other. $3 billion? You sold your company? How long have you been keeping this secret? Are you really a billionaire? I raised my hand slightly, and to my surprise, the table quieted. Perhaps wealth commanded respect even in this family. I founded health tech AI 7 years ago, I explained calmly. We developed an artificial intelligence platform that helps doctors diagnose rare diseases and create personalized treatment plans. Last month, we were acquired by a tech giant for a combination of cash and stock. But why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, her voice small and confused. I looked at her with genuine affection. I wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I have accomplished or acquired. When I left 7 years ago, it was clear that my path was not valued or understood by this family. I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. Vincent's face had turned an interesting shade of red. So all this time, while we thought you were struggling with some small startup, you were becoming a billionaire? It wasn't overnight, I clarified. The first 3 years were incredibly difficult. We almost went bankrupt twice. I lived in a tiny apartment and put everything back into the company. The breakthrough came 4 years ago when our algorithm correctly diagnosed a rare condition that had stumped specialists for years. After that, hospitals started signing up rapidly. You could have shared your success with us, my father said, an unfamiliar note of hurt in his voice. I met his gaze directly. Would it have mattered, Dad? You made it clear that the only business you respected was the family manufacturing company. The only success you valued was the kind Vincent and Gregory achieved by following in your footsteps. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air between us. Gregory's wife, Heather, broke the tension with a practical question. What exactly does your company do? In simple terms. I appreciated the redirect and explained more fully. Our AI system analyzes millions of medical records, research papers, and patient data to identify patterns humans might miss. It helps doctors diagnose difficult cases and suggests treatment options based on the latest research and similar cases worldwide. We started in rare diseases but expanded to cancer treatment, cardiology, and neurology. The platform is now used in over 2,000 hospitals globally. That's actually impressive, Gregory admitted, looking somewhat sheepish. So that's why you were researching her company, Heather said to Jackson, pieces falling into place. Jackson nodded. I've been following health tech AI for a school project on artificial intelligence. I had no idea until today that Aunt Lacey was the founder. When the acquisition news broke this morning, her name and photo appeared on all the tech news sites. Then Forbes updated their list. 3.2 billion, my father repeated, still seeming dazed. And I just told you that you wouldn't be getting an inheritance. The irony was not lost on anyone at the table. A few nervous laughs escaped, quickly stifled. I think I'm doing okay without it, I said with a small smile, trying to ease the tension. Vincent, ever the businessman, was already shifting gears. We should talk about potential collaborations between our companies. The manufacturing sector could benefit tremendously from artificial intelligence solutions. I'm sure Lacey has better things to do than help out the family business now, Aunt Martha interjected, giving me a knowing look. She had always been the most perceptive member of the family. My mother had tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, she said softly. I always knew you were special. Did she? I wondered. Had she really known, or was this retrospective pride? Either way, I appreciated the sentiment. Why did you come back in a rented Toyota if you're so wealthy? Tyler asked with the directness only a teenager could get away with. I laughed genuinely. I didn't want to make a big entrance or have everyone treat me differently because of money. I wanted to reconnect as just Lacey. That worked out well, Gregory commented dryly, but with a hint of humor. The dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. My father seemed smaller, somehow less commanding in his chair at the head of the table. Vincent was recalculating. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he reassessed my value to him. Gregory appeared genuinely interested in my story, perhaps seeing me truly for the first time. But it was the expressions of the youngest generation that gave me the most hope. Emma was looking at me with wide-eyed admiration, while Tyler and Jackson were firing off questions about technology and business that showed real engagement. As the initial shock wore off, the conversation fractured into smaller discussions. I found myself describing the early days of my company to a captivated audience of aunts and uncles, explaining how we secured our first round of funding and the pivotal clinical trial that proved our technology worked. Through it all, my father remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it regret, reevaluation, or simply calculation of what my new status might mean for him and his legacy? I knew we would need to have a private conversation before the evening ended. The dynamic between us had fundamentally changed, but money alone couldn't heal the wounds of years of emotional neglect. That would require something more valuable than billions: honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change. As I finished explaining our global expansion to Uncle James, I noticed my father quietly rise from his seat and head toward his study. Our eyes met briefly, and he tilted his head slightly, an unspoken invitation to follow. It was time for a long overdue conversation. The atmosphere in the dining room had transformed entirely. Where there had been tension and awkwardness before, now there was a buzz of excitement and curiosity. Everyone seemed eager to engage with me, to hear about my company and life in California. Vincent approached as I was preparing to follow my father to his study. "Lacey, we should discuss potential business opportunities," he said, his tone markedly different from earlier. "Our manufacturing processes could benefit greatly from AI optimization." "Perhaps another time, Vincent," I replied politely. "I think Dad wants to speak with me." Of course, he nodded quickly. "But before you leave town, we should definitely set aside some time to talk strategy." I smiled non-committally and made my way toward my father's study, a room that had once been forbidden territory unless specifically invited. As a child, being called to the study usually meant I was in trouble. Today, it felt different. I was entering not as a daughter seeking approval, but as an equal. The study looked much the same as I remembered. Dark walnut bookshelves lined the walls, filled with business books and family photographs, most featuring my brother's achievements. The large mahogany desk dominated the room, and behind it sat my father, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Close the door," he said as I entered. Not a request, but not quite the command it would have been years ago. I did so and took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, crossing my legs comfortably. "You wanted to speak with me?" He cleared his throat. "I think we have some things to discuss." "We do," I agreed, waiting for him to continue. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "What you've accomplished is impressive," he began, the words seeming insufficient even to him. "Building a company of that magnitude, especially in technology, is no small feat." "Thank you," I said simply. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "About what I said earlier regarding the inheritance." "Dad," I interrupted gently, "I don't need your money. I didn't come here today expecting an inheritance or hoping to be included in your will. That's not why I'm here." "Then why did you come?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After 7 years of minimal contact, this was the heart of it, the question that mattered more than any discussion of wealth or business success. "I came because, despite everything, you're still my father and this is still my family," I said honestly. "I came hoping that perhaps time had changed perspectives, that we might find a way to have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than conformity to your expectations." He looked down at his hands, weathered from years of work. "I've always respected you, Lacey." "Have you?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "You dismissed my education, my career choice, and my ambitions. You made it clear that the only path worthy of respect was following in your footsteps, which was never an option offered to me because I'm a woman." He flinched slightly at the directness of my words. "Times were different when I built this company. I wanted to protect you from failure. But you protected me from success, independence, The opportunity to create something meaningful, I said firmly. The business world is brutal. 9 out of 10 startups fail. I didn't want to see you get hurt. But it was okay if I was hurt by your lack of support. I countered. By being told repeatedly that my dreams were less valuable than my brother's? By being excluded from family legacy discussions. He had no immediate response to that. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, my father seemed to be genuinely reflecting on his actions. I built my company with no help from anyone, he finally said. I thought that you should do the same. I finished for him, and I did. But there's a difference between giving someone the space to succeed independently and actively dismissing their potential. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, he said eventually. I should have said that earlier. Thank you, I replied, recognizing how difficult those words were for him. But this isn't just about my business success, Dad. If I had built a modestly successful company worth a few million instead of billions, would we be having this conversation? Would you still be reconsidering your perspective? His silence was answer enough. That's the problem, I continued softly. Your respect and approval have always been conditional on success as you define it. That's not how family should work. My father looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, an unprecedented acknowledgement of fallibility. Neither do I entirely, I said honestly. But recognizing there's something to fix is a start. I don't expect decades of patterns to change overnight. I'm not even sure they can change completely. But I'd like to try to build a different kind of relationship going forward. What would that look like? He asked, and I was struck by the genuine curiosity in his tone. It would start with seeing me for who I am, not who you expected me to be, I explained. It would involve showing interest in my work because it matters to me, not because of its monetary value. It would mean acknowledging that there are many valid paths to a meaningful life, not just the one you chose. He nodded slowly. I can try to do that. That's all I'm asking for, I said. Just try, and I will too. As we sat there in his study, I realized something important. I had come to this dinner seeking some form of reconciliation, but I had expected it to be on my terms, validated by my success. In that way, perhaps I was more like my father than I cared to admit, seeking to prove my worth through achievement rather than connection. There's something else I should tell you, I said after a moment. I've established a scholarship fund at my old high school in Mrs. Bennett's name. It provides full college tuition for young women pursuing degrees in STEM fields. My father looked surprised. That's generous. It's personal, I corrected gently. Mrs. Bennett believed in me when no one else did. I want other girls to have that support, regardless of whether they get it at home. The implication was clear but not accusatory. My father nodded, understanding the message. I should get back to the others, I said, standing up. But I'm glad we had this talk. As I reached the door, my father called my name. I turned back to see him standing now too, looking somewhat uncertain. I'm sorry, Lacey, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. For not seeing your potential, for making you feel less valued than your brothers. You deserved better. The apology was imperfect, perhaps too little and certainly too late, but it was sincere. And in that moment, it was enough to open a door that had been closed for far too long. Thank you, Dad, I said simply, and left to rejoin the family gathering, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I returned to the living room, the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Small groups had formed throughout the space, conversations flowing more naturally than during the stilted dinner. My mother approached immediately, concern evident in her expression. Is everything all right? What did your father say? She asked in a hushed tone. We had a good talk, I assured her. Probably the most honest conversation we've ever had. Relief washed over her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something that looked surprisingly like guilt. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked. We moved to the kitchen, which was momentarily empty. My mother leaned against the counter, her hands fidgeting with her apron. "I owe you an apology too," she said quietly. "I should have stood up for you more. When your father dismissed your dreams, when he refused to help with college, when he favored the boys, I should have said something." "Mom, you did what you could," I began, but she shook her head. "No, I didn't. I was raised to believe that a wife supports her husband's decisions, that contradicting him publicly would undermine his authority. But that silence came at your expense, and I'm truly sorry for that." Her candor surprised me. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than addressing them directly. "I always thought you were incredible," she continued. "Your determination, your intelligence. When you left for California on your own, I was terrified for you, but also so proud. I just never said it loud enough for you to hear over your father's disapproval." I took her hand. "I hear you now, Mom, and I appreciate it more than you know." She wiped away a tear. "All these years, I've kept a folder of news articles about you and your company. Whenever I saw your name mentioned online, I printed it out. Your father never knew." This revelation touched me deeply. While my mother hadn't openly defended me, she had been silently supporting me all along. "I'd love to see that folder sometime," I said, giving her a hug. As we returned to the living room, Gregory approached, looking uncharacteristically humble. "Got a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward the back porch. Outside, the cold December air was refreshing after the emotional intensity of the evening. Gregory leaned against the railing, looking out at the backyard where we had played as children. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I've been a terrible brother." "Gregory, you don't have to." "No, I do," he insisted. "I followed Dad's lead in dismissing what you were doing. Worse, I enjoyed the favoritism without questioning whether it was fair to you. The truth is, I've always admired your courage. Following your own path, moving across the country, building something from nothing. That takes guts." His sincerity was unmistakable, and I felt a warmth toward my younger brother that I hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot." "For what it's worth, I think what you've built is incredible," he added. "Not because of the money, but because it actually helps people. Our widgets just sit in factories. Your technology saves lives." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching our breath form clouds in the cold air. "How is Jackson doing?" I asked, changing the subject. "He seems pretty interested in technology." Gregory smiled proudly. "He's brilliant with computers. Takes after his aunt, apparently. He's been talking about majoring in computer science, but I didn't know how to guide him." "Maybe you could." "I'd be happy to talk with him," I offered. "Help him explore options, maybe set up some internship opportunities if he's interested." "That would be amazing," Gregory said gratefully. When we returned inside, I found Emma sitting alone on the window seat, watching something on her tablet. "What are you working on?" I asked, sitting beside her. She looked up shyly. "Just a coding tutorial. I'm trying to learn Python." My heart leapt. "Really? That's wonderful. What got you interested in coding?" "We had a technology week at school, and I really liked the logic of it," she explained, her face lighting up. "Mom got me this online course for Christmas, but it's kind of confusing sometimes." "I could help you with that," I offered. "And maybe introduce you to some women engineers at my company who could mentor you." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that for real?" "Absolutely," I assured her. "In fact, my company runs a summer program for high school students interested in tech. You'd be eligible in a few years." The excitement on her face reminded me of myself at her age, discovering the world of possibilities that technology represented. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in a series of meaningful conversations that would have been unimaginable just hours before. Vincent's initial attempt to discuss business opportunities had been transparent and self-serving, but when I spoke with him later, I sensed a genuine, if grudging, respect. You know, I always thought you were just being stubborn, refusing to join the family business, he admitted. I never considered that you might be building something better. Different, not better, I corrected. Just better suited to my interests and strengths. Even Aunt Martha had insights to share. Your grandmother would have been so proud of you, she told me quietly. She wanted to start her own business back in the 1950s, but your grandfather insisted it wasn't appropriate for a woman. She channeled all that ambition into community work instead. But I always wondered what she might have accomplished with today's opportunities. These glimpses into family history and the shifting perspectives around me were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The wealth and success that had been revealed were catalysts, but the real change was happening on a much deeper level. Jackson sought me out as the evening was winding down. Aunt Lacey, I have so many questions about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Do you think sometime I could tour your company or something? His enthusiasm was infectious. I'd love that, Jackson. In fact, why don't you come out to California this summer? You could shadow different teams, get a real sense of how a tech company operates. Are you serious? He exclaimed. That would be insane. We'll make it happen, I promised, making a mental note to discuss it with Gregory and Heather. The evening might have continued in this vein of reconnection and new understanding, but around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my COO and closest friend. Lacey, I'm sorry to interrupt your family time, but we have a situation with the integration team, she explained rapidly. The tech giant engineers made some changes to the core algorithm without proper testing, and 3 hospitals are reporting issues with the system. How serious? I asked, immediately shifting into business mode. No patient impact yet, but we need to roll back the changes immediately. And their CTO is pushing back. We need your authority on this. I'll be on a video call in 20 minutes, I promised, then ended the call. I found my mother to explain the situation. I have to leave early. There's a work emergency that needs my attention. Of course, dear, she said, understanding in her eyes. Will we see you before you head back to California? I'll make time, I promised. Maybe breakfast tomorrow. As I said my goodbyes, I was struck by how different they felt from when I had arrived. There were hugs from my niece and nephews, a warm embrace from my mother, respectful handshakes from my brothers, and even a brief, awkward hug from my father. We'll talk more, he promised as I was leaving. There's a lot to catch up on. I nodded, cautiously optimistic. I'd like that. Driving away from the house that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. The revelation of my success had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. But money alone couldn't heal relationships. That would take time, effort, and willingness on all sides. But for the first time in many years, I felt that such healing might actually be possible. 1 year later, I found myself once again driving toward my childhood home for Christmas dinner. Unlike the previous year, I drove my own car, no longer feeling the need to downplay my success. The anxiety that had accompanied last year's visit was replaced by cautious optimism. So much had changed in 12 months. My relationship with my family had been rebuilt gradually through consistent effort on all sides. It hadn't been easy or perfect, but it had been genuine. My father had surprised me the most. 2 weeks after last Christmas, he had called to tell me he was seeing a therapist, something I never would have imagined possible for a man of his generation and temperament. I want to understand why I treated you the way I did, he had explained. And more importantly, I want to do better. That commitment to growth had manifested in various ways throughout the year. He had asked thoughtful questions about my company during our regular phone calls. He had read articles about women in technology and sent them to me. He had even flown out to California twice to see my office and meet my team. The family business had evolved as well. Vincent and Gregory had indeed taken over leadership as planned, but they had implemented significant changes. They had created a formal internship program to bring more women into manufacturing management. They had established a technology division focused on modernizing their processes. And most surprisingly, they had appointed my mother to the board of directors, acknowledging that her years of listening to business discussions at the dinner table had given her valuable insights. As I pulled into the driveway, I smiled at the sight of multiple cars already parked outside. This year, I wasn't the last to arrive. My mother greeted me at the door with a warm embrace. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Everyone's already here, including some special guests." Inside, the living room was filled with familiar faces, but also some new ones. Sarah, my COO, was chatting animatedly with Gregory about artificial intelligence. Two young women from our engineering team were showing Emma something on a laptop. Jackson was deep in conversation with our lead data scientist, who had been his mentor during his summer internship. This blending of my professional and family worlds would have been unimaginable a year ago. My father approached, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. "Merry Christmas, Lacey," he said, giving me a genuine hug. "We have some exciting news to share at dinner." The dining room table had been extended to accommodate everyone. As we gathered around, I noticed something different about the seating arrangement. My father wasn't at the head of the table. Instead, he and my mother sat side by side in the middle, symbolically changing the power dynamic that had defined our family for decades. As we enjoyed the meal, conversation flowed naturally between topics, from business to technology to personal updates. The rigid boundaries that had once separated acceptable dinner discussion from taboo topics had dissolved. After the main course, my father stood to make an announcement, much as he had the previous year. But his demeanor was entirely different. "I want to share some news about Wilson Manufacturing," he began. "As you know, Vincent and Gregory have been leading the company for the past year, and they've done an exceptional job." My brothers nodded appreciatively. But they've also shown me that my vision for the company was too limited. Today I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Wilson Innovation Fund, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs in technology and manufacturing. Surprised murmurs circulated around the table. This fund will be led by a board consisting of Diane, Lacey, and a rotating position filled by the women in our extended family, starting with Emma once she turns 18, he continued. "We'll be allocating 5% of the company's annual profits to support women who, like Lacey, have the vision and determination to build something important." I was speechless. This wasn't just a token gesture, but a meaningful commitment to systemic change. Additionally, my father went on, "We've established the Bennett Scholarship, which will fully fund college education for 5 young women each year who are pursuing degrees in STEM or business." I caught my mother's eye across the table. She was beaming with pride, not just in my father's announcement, but in her own role in shaping these initiatives. She had found her voice this past year, and the entire family was better for it. After dinner, I found a quiet moment with my father in the backyard. The winter air was crisp, the sky clear and filled with stars. "The Innovation Fund is an incredible initiative," I told him. "Thank you for doing that." "It was the right thing to do," he replied simply. "I spent too many years limiting opportunity rather than creating it. I can't change the past, but I can help shape a better future. That's all any of us can do." I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, I always thought legacy was about passing on what I had built, preserving it exactly as I created it," he reflected. "But I've realized that true legacy is about passing on values that allow the next generation to build something even better, something I might never have imagined." Those words reflected the profound change in my father, a change I had never thought possible. It wasn't perfect resolution, not complete transformation, but it was genuine growth. And in families, as in life, that's often the most we can hope for. Inside, the house was filled with conversation and laughter. Emma was showing me the coding project she had been working on. Jackson was discussing his college applications, with several top computer science programs on his list. Gregory and Vincent were engaged in a friendly debate about the future of AI in manufacturing. My mother approached with a warm smile. "This is what I always wanted," she said softly. "All of us together, truly together, not just in the same room. As I looked around at my family, both blood relatives and the chosen family I had built through my company, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been difficult, filled with pain and misunderstanding, but also with growth and eventual healing. Success and wealth had opened the door to reconciliation, but it was the harder work of honest communication, accountability, and forgiveness that had allowed us to walk through that door together. In the end, my worth had never been about the number on the Forbes list. It had been about staying true to myself, building something meaningful, and finding the courage to offer forgiveness when it would have been easier to hold on to resentment. That night, as we gathered for a family photo, I realized that the true measure of wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you build together with those you love. If you're watching this and have experienced family dynamics where your worth was questioned or your path dismissed, I hope my story offers some comfort. Remember that validation ultimately comes from within, not from others' approval. Your path may not be understood by those closest to you, but that doesn't make it any less valuable or worthy of pursuit. Have you ever had to prove yourself to family members who doubted you, or found reconciliation after years of misunderstanding? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional path can lead to both success and healing. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to forge our own path, even when others can't see where it leads.